and Alexander. And what we're going to talk about today deals specifically with business succession and exit planning. You know, how to start thinking about ultimately transitioning your business to somebody else, whether that's to a third party, to a family member. Darren, in your case, perhaps 2 sons. Bart, in your case, something similar. But transitioning the business to a third party and ways to do that. What we're going to talk about today are at least 4 or 5 different specific mechanisms that can be used to transition the business, particularly to key employees or other insiders, family members, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of those different kinds of techniques. Now, one of the things that we'll be touching on is promoting the value of the business. You know, for most family businesses, small to medium, mid-sized business owners, that business is the key and primary value of what you own. Well, we're going to talk a bit about how to promote the value of that business to maximize what the business owner may be able to get out of it upon transition. Again, whether that transition is just retirement from the business, a sale of the business, or a transfer to younger generations. But we're also going to touch about how to protect the value of that business. And that's where my partner here, Patricia Alexander, is going to talk a little bit about that in terms of protecting the value of the business, in particular, protecting the value of the business through the avoidance of litigation, which any of you as business owners who may have been involved in litigation in the past know that can be a substantial drain on the business, your time, and the value of the business. So as we talk about this, the things that we're going to go through are first, a little overview about the business succession planning, the litigation avoidance piece, which will fit into promoting the value of the business and then protecting that value. And we'll touch on continuity planning. And that is, as a business owner, how do you ensure the business continues if something happens to you? Upon your death, disability, incapacity, your inability to work in the business, and to maximize the value of what your family members might then ultimately get out of the business. And then we'll move into the transition of the business by sale to family members, other key employees or insiders of the business, and a couple of other techniques to succeed out of the business and transfer that to younger generations. More than 50% of the businesses, more than 80% of the businesses in the U.S. are private or family dominated. 175 of the Fortune 500 are dominated by a single family. And the International Family Business Program Association estimates family businesses make up 60 to 75% of the U.S. gross domestic product. But at any given time, 40% of businesses in the U.S. are in some form of transition. So it's that transition that we're going to talk about today. Look, at some point, every business owner leaves their business, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Right? Well, at that time, how do you maximize the owner's value out of the business to accomplish the personal, family, and financial goals that the owner has? Well, those are the things that we're going to talk about today. Unfortunately, closely held businesses have an extraordinary failure rate as well. Right? 70% of family-owned businesses do not survive to the second generation, and upwards of 85% do not survive to the third generation. The average family-owned business lasts 24 years. And there are a variety of reasons for that. One is the failure to plan, the failure to put in place a mechanism for the transition of the business. Another reason family businesses often fail is the failure to plan for the successive generations when you have some family members that are active in the business and some that are inactive in the business, right? And a means by which to help those family members, particularly in the younger generation, that are not active in the business, to be fair to them when you really want to leave the business to those that are active in the business. A few years ago, there was a family winery out of California that made the news because the president of the company had gotten fired by his mother. Well, the problem there was that the father owned all of the stock of the company. There were two sons involved, one active in the business, one not active in the business. But when the father passed away, all of the stock of the company passed to the mother, who unfortunately favored the son who was not active in the business. Well, that business ultimately failed because the son who did know the business and was active in the business got terminated. The father didn't plan for a succession of that business to the son that was active in it and knew what he was doing. And that, unfortunately, happens all too frequently without good planning. There's this quote that I like from Seneca. It says, "When a man does not know which harbor he is heading for, no wind is the right wind." That emphasizes the point that the necessity of planning to succeed the business to younger generations, if that's the ultimate plan. If younger generations of the family is where the business ultimately is going to end up in. So the things that we're going to talk a little bit about now are the purpose of exit planning, setting objectives for the business owner, determining the value and price of the business, and we'll talk about why that's important. Protecting the value of the business. We'll touch on why that's important and how to do that. And then we'll move into this contingency planning idea. How do you put in place a mechanism to ensure the business continues in place if something happens to the owner, and to maximize the value of the business for the family members that are left? And then ultimately we'll go through these 4 or 5 different structures that can be put in place to transition the business either to a third party or to family members or other key employees and insiders. Setting the objectives of the owner. The things to think about here, first of all, how much longer does the owner want to stay involved in the business? What kind of time frame do we have to transition that owner out of the business? Because there are very different tools that might be involved in transitioning the business away from the owner, either into retirement or just out of the business, depending on what that time frame looks like. There are very different mechanisms that can go in place if we're looking at a 1 to 2 year period versus a 5 to 10 year period. So one of the first things that the business owner in thinking of transitioning out of the business has to think about is, what's the time frame? How much longer do I want to be involved? What's the annual after-tax income that I as a business owner need in retirement? Right? And that brings us back to that value of the business. Have we got sufficient value in the business that when we do transition out of it, whether it's a sale, to a third party, to family members, to key employees, am I going to get sufficient value out of the business to meet that after-tax income I want in retirement? Who do I want to transition the business to? I need to think about that. Family members, co-owners, existing co-owners, key employees, or am I going to sell to a third party? In setting this or thinking about this objective of how long do I want to stay in the business, I think another critical component is for the business owner to think about, what am I going to do when I am out of the business? A number of years ago, I met with a client that we were doing some estate planning for, and he had sold a very successful company in Minnesota just a few months previously. And we were talking a little bit about that sale and how it happened and what he was doing now. One of the things he said to me that's always stuck is, he said, as I was selling that business, I wish somebody had put in my mind the thought of, or at least to start thinking about, how am I going to spend my days when I'm no longer spending them at the business? Because frankly, I just don't know what to do with myself anymore. I don't know how I'm supposed to spend my time. And I just wish somebody had at least put that thought in my mind so I could give some thought to that. Figure out how I am going to spend the rest of my life. So I think that's also a very important factor as the business owner starts thinking about transitioning out of the business. What am I going to do in the next stage of my life? Determining value and price in business. But why do we need to know that? As I mentioned earlier, generally, the business itself is the owner's most valuable asset. His or her financial security depends on maximizing the value of that business and then ultimately converting that value to cash. The owner and his advisors need to know what the current value is, again, to determine whether that after-tax net income that the owner ultimately needs in retirement can be met. So how do we go about increasing the value of the business? Well, there's a number of steps that need to be followed to increase the value of the business. First, focus on increasing cash flow of the business. Develop operating systems that support and improve the sustainability of that cash flow. Document the sustainability of earnings. I think one of the things that I see in my practice from time to time, particularly when we're talking about sales to third parties, are business owners that have not documented well the processes and mechanisms that they use in their business, have good financial statements and balance sheets that are clean and can be looked at by third parties in an understandable way. And the importance of ensuring those things are in place and that your corporate documents, your organizational documents are clean and in place. Making sure that as a third party comes in and starts to conduct their due diligence for a purchase of the business, that those things are up to date, clean, and can be looked at in a supportable way. Improve your facility, right? The appearance of the facility. Pay down debt. Solidify and diversify your customer base. Implement a strategy to grow the business. Build a solid management team and groom a successor. All of those things are going to lead to improved profitability and improved value of the business. Now, when we talk about building that solid management team and grooming a successor key employee, if that's who the transition ultimately is going to go to, even if it's another family member, right, there's a variety of ways to incentivize key employees, even if they're family members, to be involved in the business and improve the value of the business. And we're going to talk about how a couple of those might work. But it's also critically important when we're talking about incentivizing key employees to do it in a way that you can ensure that those key employees are going to stay with the business if something happens to the owner. That's another circumstance that we see, unfortunately, all too often. Something happens to the owner of the business, and there may be very good key employees involved in the business that if they had been incentivized to stay with the business, would have, and could have continued the profitability of that business in the absence of its owner. All too often, though, there's no formal plan in place to incentivize those key employees. Now something happens to the owner, and it's chaos. You've got key employees leaving in droves to find jobs because now that the owner's gone, they have no confidence that the business is going to stay around. Well, there's a variety of ways to incentivize those key employees to stay, whether it's through equity-based incentives or cash-based incentives. Some of those include, for example, stock bonus programs that provide stock as part of the compensation to the key employee for staying around. Stock options, giving the key employees an opportunity to buy stock in the company at a discount or at a lesser rate than the fair market value of the stock. Allowing employees a standard stock purchase arrangement where they can buy stock and become incentivized in that way. cash-based bonuses, outright cash for meeting objective, clear criteria. Non-qualified deferred compensation plans. They give key employees the ability to earn deferred compensation for meeting objective criteria. Phantom stock plans, essentially profit-sharing plans that give key employees the ability to earn the profits of the company, but without actually becoming an owner. Now, in any kind of incentive-based plan for key employees to incentivize them to stay around and in essence put handcuffs on them to stay in the business, the failure that we oftentimes see is that incentive plans for key employees are, number one, typically arbitrary for the owner. They're subjective to the owner. To have a good incentive program for a key employee, it's got to be based on objective criteria that the key employee knows what goals have to be met to reach whatever the incentive is, whether that's stock in the company, whether it's a cash bonus. Critically important to document what that is and how that goal can be reached, because what we're really trying to do here is to improve the value of the business, to drive up the value of the business. So as an owner, you want those incentives to be tied to things that are going to increase profitability and increase the value of the business. Tie it to performance standards that are going to go to the bottom line of the profit and loss statement and increasing the value of the business. To make a real incentive program available for key employees, though, that bonus has got to be something substantial if it's really going to mean something to the key employee. And substantial not in the eyes of the owner, but in the eyes of the key employee. And that may be two very different things. So as an owner, you have to think not in terms of what am I giving up to the key employee to provide this incentive program, but how can I incentivize that key employee in a way that is substantial to them and will essentially keep them handcuffed to the business because they're increasing the value of the business. And if I ultimately want to transition the business to somebody else, a sale to the third party, or if something happens to me as the owner, I want to make sure I've done it in a way that's going to handcuff that key employee to the business. What we're going to move into now, we've talked a little bit about how family businesses, how much they make up of the marketplace that we have, how often they fail because of a variety of factors, increasing the value of the business. And now I'm going to have Patricia talk for a minute on protecting that value. One of the worst things that can happen is you've put all of this thought and work into things that are going to drive the value of the business up, and then you have something catastrophic happen that destroys the value of that business because now the company's embroiled in a lawsuit.
Okay, well, I've seen a failure of each one of these things, so I can tell you that these are very real concerns for a business. Practically every small business starts with a handshake. It's either spouses or father and son, mother-daughter, or people that are such good friends that they can't even imagine anything ever going wrong. And what ends up happening is when something does go wrong, that's the first time that a lot of times that there's a realization that the documentation is not in place to protect the business. And so what we're trying to say is the time to put all these plans in place is when there's nothing wrong, when you don't need them. Because if you don't have them now, then they won't be there when you need them. You can't get somebody to sign an agreement after they're already unhappy. Okay? So even if you have a business that started on a handshake, it's still not too late to put very formal partnership agreements, operating agreements, buy-sell agreements into place so that when you do end up with someone that's unhappy and wants out, or they want you out, or there's a disagreement about how the business is being operated, you already have a plan in place for how to deal with that. And now there's actually two situations that you might have here. You might have an investor, someone who's a minority shareholder in the business. They're unhappy, but they don't have the power to do anything about it, so all they do is just make a lot of trouble. They might sue, they might get your employees unhappy. There's a lot of things that a minority shareholder can do because they feel powerless to do what they really want to do, which is control the business. So it's a good idea to have in place a buy-sell agreement that permits you to buy that shareholder out under certain circumstances and even make it to where he has to sell you his shares under certain circumstances. Or convolutely, so that the minority investor will have an incentive to want to keep part of the business because he feels like his investment is safe. So a proper buy-sell agreement for either for an LLC or a partnership is the way to go about that.
And in a minute, we're going to talk in a lot of detail about continuity planning through buy-sell arrangements and how those can work.
Yeah. Now, security law issues is a little bit different in that what most people do when they want to get a little more capital to do what they want to do in their business is they'll approach friends and family. And they'll say, you know, can you come up with an extra $50,000? I'll give you a quarter of my business. And everybody shakes hands and walks away and they think that they're done. The problem is that under Arizona securities laws, you might have made some really serious errors, statutory, that could subject you to civil fines and possibly even criminal liability. And this is never good news. And it never really comes up when you're actually taking the money and putting it in the bank and investing in the business. It comes up when somebody is unhappy and they've made this investment and it's not going as well as they think it should go. They're not making as much money as they thought they should make. They consult a lawyer. A lawyer will look up the statutes for Arizona securities laws violations, and you're in deep trouble, and it's too late to do anything about it. So the time to discover what Arizona securities laws are is before you seek those investments. People are going to be happy to give you the money in the beginning. You just need to do your homework before you do it.
And you know, on this issue, I think this is one area where I see people make mistakes all the time, and it relates back in some ways to even the incentive programs that we touched on earlier. Issuing stock to employees as compensation, allowing key employees to buy stock in the company, whether it's through stock options or outright purchases of stock. Now, anytime an owner is issuing stock, issuing ownership to somebody else, they are involved in the business of issuing securities. And there are all kinds of agreements that need to go in place to ensure that that owner is not violating state and federal securities laws.
Right, and disclosures.
A number of different kinds of disclosures that need to go in place as that stock is being issued. Regardless of